I'm going to expand some more on this amazing journey of, Nebuchadnezzar, actually, in Daniel 4. There is no disclosure like it in this detail in the Bible. We see here Nebuchadnezzar was a great king, a huge king, and he discloses so much of his personal life and his journey of faith in God. And it's chapter 4 talks about this dream that he has of a tree and that troubled him so much. But it's not, it doesn't, take away all of the ups and downs and the walk that Nebuchadnezzar had toward God and then toward himself, and or away from God. And he learns through this journey that God could miraculously um, save these three young men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, from a fiery furnace that he set up like nobody ever could. I mean, it was just such a an extreme situation, and God was able to save. And this changed Nebuchadnezzar. This made him aware and understand that this encounter with God was very real. And the it's like almost like Nebuchadnezzar's personal testimony that we get in chapter 4. And he tells us, of course, about this dream with the tree, but he doesn't actually goes directly to Daniel, who Daniel has proved himself already in the first interpretation of the first dream, and God, and also with his diet, and also being seen as triumphing in that situation where he wouldn't eat the king's food. But still, King Nebuchadnezzar doesn't go to him first. He goes to his usual suspects of the magicians and the diviners and the astrologers first. But then he ends up praising God. He ends up exalting the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And he says how great are his signs, how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom. That's in Daniel 4:3. He acknowledges the miracles. He acknowledges the strength that he's witnessed, that even through this blazing furnace that God has saved these young men. But he doesn't come to full realization, because we see him once again retreat later on in the chapter. But he speaks so candidly. We don't usually hear this kind of dialogue in the Bible. He says, "I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at ease in my house, prospering in my palace, and I saw a dream that made me afraid as I lie in bed. The fancies of the vision of my head alarmed me." He turned again, like I say, to the regular wise men that he had on hand. But you see, these wise men were astrologers, and so they were the sourcing of their answers, or the sourcing of their process was evil. It was the occult. So ultimately, what we learn from Daniel producing the truth of Nebuchadnezzar's dream is that God triumphs all of the darkness, all of the evil practices, and all of the anything that's sourced from Satan is triumphed by God, and through this, in this case, through his servant Daniel. So the king does finally turn to Daniel, and he knows, because he says the spirit of the holy gods is in Daniel. So he understands that. So this is, we have to remember, who is Nebuchadnezzar. He's a god who worships paganism, and He's he is not following God, but yet he seems to give God, acknowledgement all the time. Um, so he gets this description of this wonderful tree that's sheltering all of the people and the animals and the birds, and it's a huge tree, and it's flourishing and it's prosperous. And then from 413, I'm just going to read this little piece. Um, a holy one, which is Daniel, um, or no, a holy one comes proclaiming, chop down the tree and lop off its branches, strip off its leaves and scatter its fruit, but leave the stump of its roots in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze. Let him be wet with the dew of heaven. Let his portion be with the beasts of the grass of the earth. Let his mind be changed from a man's, and let it a beast's mind be given to him. And this is actually what did happen to Nebuchadnezzar. It's almost like a description of becoming insane, that he is living through. Um, the purpose, the purpose that Nebuchadnezzar grasped, or the dream gave him, was that the living may know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will, and sets over the lowliest of men. So the truth that Daniel was able to tell this man, this king actually, who had the power to kill him, he told the king, in such a loving way. He could have just told the king what the dream meant. I mean, that's what was requested of him, but he explained how to do it in a kind and loving way. And it's so much a better thing if we can wrap the truth in kindness and love. Actually, that's what's commanded us, to speak the truth in love. Now, the truth is not always easy to receive or understand or digest or take, but if we can do it with love, it makes the packaging so much better. And I'm sure at this point Nebuchadnezzar, to get to a place of change, which was the ultimate purpose that God had. It's not God's will that any perish. He used his servant Daniel, who did deliver with a lot of love. So what else can I share here? He was very respectful. That's the thing. Daniel was very respectful, as he advised Nebuchadnezzar, and confronted him that he would need to change his ways, which is what's we're all called to. What we're all called to do is to change our ways for God's ways, and to choose to show mercy, and to pursue the Lord, and to be righteous people. And then, he does give him hope, too. I mean, he says to the king that then maybe, if you repent and you follow the one true God, then perhaps he would restore your prosperity and extend a lengthening of your kingdom, and of your life. Maybe not his kingdom, but of his life. There was 12 months, we read before in the scripture that 12 months went by. All this happened to King Nebuchadnezzar. 12 months later, the king was walking on the roof of the palace. Now, this was interesting because before he became like a beast in the field, we are given the information that this 12 months period happened, and this is what happened. 12 months later, Nebuchadnezzar was walking on the roof of the palace and of Babylon, and he said, "Is not this great Babylon I have built as my royal residence, by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty?" I mean, you see, he's just gone right back to the slop. He's glorifying himself again, and that's when all of the even it says, even as the words were on his lips, even as the words were on his lips, the kingdom was taken from him. And the fact is that he was so boastful, and seen so much. He knows he's a mighty God, but yet he was so boastful anyway. So I've learned that also the archaeologists have excavated at Babylon, and they said it was one of the most amazing, beautiful, great cities. Systems like double walls and 8-story high buildings, and it was wide enough to allow the chariots passage through, and it was just a very grand place, with all kinds of you know indications of different ancient civilizations. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon are famous that were there, and Nebuchadnezzar built for one of his wives. And longed for the one of the wives was from Persia and longed for her homeland. But he spoke boastful words, and right that moment before the words had exited his lips, God struck this proclamation that he was going to lose everything, and he became like a beast. So, yeah, that's that. An interesting thing too is the way that mental illness had been described by the peoples of that time. Um, that one of the maladies is that the people would imagine themselves to be animals, different animals. Um, so there was one incident by a scholar called Roland Harrison, and he had visited a British mental institution around 1946, and he did see such a case as this. There was a patient, who was wandering around, and he thought like an ox, like a cow, a cattle, whatever, and eating grass, and that's the only thing he would eat, and had long hair and thick fingernails. So I mean, it's really bizarre. But mental illness was seen. There was an episode that would look like that. It says that that this was the hopeful thing, that there was a time of recovery for Nebuchadnezzar, and he did recover. We find that around chapter 4, 34, I think, yeah. So it says there in chapter 4:34, "At the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my reason returned to me. And I blessed the Most High, and praised and honored him who lives forever, for all the inhabitants of the earth were accounted as nothing, and he does according to his will among the host of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth. And none can stay his hand or say to him, "What have you done?" So his final place was a place that he had become healed. Now, he went through an awful lot to get to that place. Um, there are places in our lives that we do walk at that seem so difficult, but knowing that we belong to the Lord, that we belong to God, that we are His possession, He'll take us through whatever's necessary to bring us to a place of healing. And he finally understood the importance of yielding and submitting his will to God's will. And he confesses that. And we see that there. Um, in fact, in 437, it's a very deliberate professing of faith. Nebuchadnezzar says, "Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, for all his works are right, and his ways are just. And those who walk in pride he is able to humble." So that's a really hopeful story, although a very revealing story of the king, and what he was able to, how he was able to come to this place. Um, so to wrap up and to kind of review, the Israelites that were there, that were captive in Babylon, um, they were far from home, and their temple that they worshipped God had been destroyed, and everything that was familiar to them, their way of worship, was gone, and their communicating with God and the communion they had with God was changed. And now, instead of being like a nation under God, they lived in frightening conditions with their lives at stake, and they had not only a rational king, like a lunatic king, they had to live under, and there was nothing that was stable or comfortable about their situation. But yet, even in this turmoil and this stressful place, that God was able to locate them. I mean, he knows where everything is anyway, but he was able to find them, and for them to know that that he was in control, and that he was there for them. They sought him. They prayed and sought him. And ultimately, the wondrous part of this story is that God humbles even Nebuchadnezzar, and he is sovereign over all things. So, if we in our life, in our daily life, if we are feeling like overwhelmed, or I know what overwhelms me, I know what makes me feel uncomfortable and stressed, and even in this world, there's things that are so precarious, really, some things. So even in those conditions and situations, if we can see the example that is left for us in Daniel, likely we won't have to go into a fiery furnace and be under such kind of oppression as that, and fear that would grip us that way. But even if we did face such a terrorizing kind of situation, we can know that God is not going to change. He does not change like shifting shadows. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever, and he is still mighty to save. And we are his possession, and he loves us and cares for us. So I want that to be encouraging today. I want that to be a part of our understanding, our heart knowing in our development as his own, that Jesus is with us. He's in us and through us, and that he'll never leave us or forsake us, as he never left Daniel or forsook the three young Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, young Jewish men. So I hope that is encouraging. I hope that's something you can take with you and look to him and be radiant. God bless everyone.